The alien council chamber was vast, a cathedral of glass and steel that seemed to swallow sound. High above, banners of every member species hung in a perfect arc, their colors dimmed under the cold blue glow of the central hollow projector. I stood in the shadows near the entrance, deliberately unremarkable in a plain Earth delegate uniform with no rank, no insignia, just another body in the gallery. The air smelled faintly of ozone, the scent of overworked projectors and sterilized ventilation, and the silence was so complete I could hear the soft hum of my own respirator. On the central dais, the footage rolled. Not simulation. Not reenactment. This was the real thing, raw combat recordings from the Battle of their Axis 4, a place the Council's official archives didn't even list. Someone had spliced together multiple feeds, helmet cams, drone captures, and gunship visuals, all pieced into a single stream. I'd seen it before, of course. Lived it. But here, in this chamber, it felt different. Like I was watching someone else's life. The image shook violently as a dropship bucked under enemy fire, alarms screaming in a dozen languages. Through the smoke, you could make out a human platoon in dark armor, pushing forward through sheets of plasma fire. Alien bodies fell in grotesque arcs, some torn apart mid-stride, others crumpling with holes big enough to see through. The council delegates leaned forward, transfixed by the chaos they'd never dare step into themselves. And then he appeared. The human commander. Sprinting through a collapsing corridor of fire, the world around him melting and burning. Armor plate scorched, helmet visor cracked, he moved like someone who hadn't yet realized he should be dead. 2 wounded soldiers hung over his shoulders, their legs dragging through the ash as he bulldozed forward. Bolts of energy sparked off his chest plate, and still he ran, weaving between debris and falling walls, never slowing. "That one," whispered a Zarati senator, her voice like sharpened glass, "is the anomaly." Her talons clicked against the railing, each sound a measured note of fascination. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. They didn't know his name. They didn't know my name. And I intended to keep it that way, at least for now. I watched as they rewound the footage, playing the same 7 seconds again and again. They analyzed his movements, the improbable angles he avoided incoming fire, the way he shielded the wounded with his own body. A Surati general leaned toward his aide. "Look at the heat signature, he's already running past endurance. No alien physiology could do this. No soldier should." Their fascination was almost clinical. To them, the man in the footage wasn't a person. He was a problem to be solved, an equation that didn't fit their neat little models of war. And I knew exactly how it would end. When they were done studying him, they'd want to know why no one had ever heard of him again. Why his name wasn't in the reports. Why he had vanished. That part of the story, they'd hear from me soon enough. The truth is, I never set out to vanish. Before their Axis, for I was a name that meant something, at least in the right circles. Captain Elias Rain of the Iron Wolves. My unit's reputation wasn't built on propaganda or polished recruitment reels. It was written in blood, ours and the enemy's. We'd been the blade the brass pulled out when the situation was already falling apart, the kind of soldiers you sent into a fire expecting they'd drag something valuable back out. On paper, we were a rapid response company. In reality, we were the Council's last resort when things got ugly enough they didn't want their own people in the line of fire. Their Axis 4 was supposed to be routine. That's what they told us, anyway. A minor insurgency, Cthor splinter cells holed up in an abandoned refinery complex. The local defense forces had them contained, and we were there to assist in securing the area. Contained. Secured. Words that look good in briefings but mean nothing once you hit dirt. Our dropship came in low over the barren flats, engines kicking up swirls of dust the color of dried blood. I remember thinking how quiet the place looked from the air. No movement, no heat signatures except the ones our intel flagged as hostile clusters inside the refinery. Too easy. The wolves were on edge, all of us feeling that itch you get before something breaks. It broke 30 seconds after we landed. The first shot didn't even come from the complex. It came from behind us, a beam of plasma slicing through the air and hitting our second dropship mid-descent. The sky lit up with a storm of fire, and the sound, gods, the sound, was like metal screaming in agony. The ship twisted, burning, and came down hard in a blossom of shrapnel and black smoke. Then the ground lit up. Energy bolts from concealed emplacements tore into our lines, burning through armor and flesh in equal measure. The comms filled with overlapping screams and orders, half of them drowned by static. My HUD lit up red across the board, friendlies dropping, enemy positions multiplying, our supposed secure zone turning into a death trap. And then the final betrayal, our orbital support vanished. I could see the Council frigates in the upper atmosphere turning away, breaking formation. No fire support, no medevac. Just the wolves and an army of Cthor closing in. Someone, maybe Han, yelled in my ear that we were surrounded. She was wrong. Surrounded implies there's still a perimeter you can hold. What we had was collapse, the ground falling away under us while fire came from every direction. I gave one order. Hold. Not because I thought help was coming. Not because I believed we could win. But because the only thing left to do was keep fighting until something gave way, either us or them. It would be 3 days before I learned which it would be. We held the line for 3 days, though line was a generous term. It was more like a patchwork of crumbling cover, slagged barricades, and the bodies of the fallen. The refinery complex became our fortress and our graveyard, its steel corridors echoing with gunfire, its walls scorched black from the constant plasma strikes. There was no dawn or dusk in that place, just the flicker of muzzle flashes and the red glare of alien targeting lasers cutting through smoke. The wolves fought like cornered animals because that's exactly what we were. Ammo dwindled from the first hour, and by the end of the first day, we'd burned through half our reserves. Every shot had to count. I remember the weight of my rifle feeling heavier, not from exhaustion but from the knowledge that each remaining round was one less chance to survive. We stripped weapons from the dead, ours and theirs, learning to fire Cthor rifles that spat superheated gas instead of slugs, figuring out the alien power cells, rewiring them on the fly when they overheated. Private Han stayed glued to her comm station, her voice steady even when her armor hissed and smoked from a near hit. She called out enemy movements with an eerie calm, like she'd already accepted we wouldn't be leaving alive. Sergeant Vale was a different story. He became a storm, moving from position to position, rallying the wolves with words I can't remember but will never forget the sound of. The Cthor came in waves, testing us. At first they kept their distance, sending drones and light infantry. We burned them down. Then they sent the heavies, towering warforms with armor thick enough to deflect our remaining rounds unless we hit joints or eye clusters. We took them apart piece by piece, dragging their hulks into choke points to use as improvised cover. We stopped thinking about the bigger picture. The Council, the war, the reasons we were here, none of it mattered anymore. It was about the man or woman next to you, about making sure they lived one more minute, one more hour. We fought past exhaustion, past hunger, past the creeping certainty that this was where we'd die. By the second night, the air was so thick with burnt ozone and blood that breathing felt like swallowing knives. The Cthor had breached the outer levels, and the firefights moved into the refinery's guts. We fought in machine halls, in narrow catwalks above molten processing pits, in corridors so tight that melee became the only option. I used to think fear was the worst thing a soldier could feel. But I learned something else in those days. The real killer is the moment you stop feeling anything at all. When you're too tired to be afraid, too focused on the next trigger pull to care if the next shot is aimed at you. That's how we survived 3 days without breaking. Not because we weren't afraid. Because we didn't have the luxury of fear anymore. On the third night, the storm came. Not rain, not wind, their axis, for didn't have that kind of mercy. This was a plasma storm, the kind the locals used to whisper about, the kind that stripped unshielded skin from bone in seconds. The sky turned a burning violet, the clouds lit from within by currents of raw, arcing energy. Every flash lit the battlefield like daylight for a heartbeat, then plunged it back into darkness, leaving afterimages burned into my eyes. That was when the Cthor made their mistake. Whether it was arrogance or desperation, I never learned, but their command ordered a tactical withdrawal. We could see them moving, silhouettes against the stormlight, pulling back toward their forward operating base to regroup. They thought we'd hunker down and lick our wounds. They thought we'd be too broken to chase them. They were wrong. I didn't sleep. I didn't even stop to think. My armor was cracked in 3 places, my right gauntlet barely holding together with field welds, and my rifle's barrel glowed faintly from overuse. None of that mattered. What mattered was momentum. If we let them regroup, They'd come back in the morning with enough force to finish us. I gave the order, and the wolves followed without hesitation. Not because it was safe. Not because it made sense. But because we all knew the truth. Staying put was death. Moving forward at least gave us a chance. We hit their lines hard. Plasma rain lashed the ground, making every step feel like walking through fire, but it also fried their drones and shorted out some of their heavier armor. We moved low and fast, using the jagged remains of transport wrecks as cover. Every time lightning split the sky, I could see their startled faces, alien eyes widening as they realized the humans they'd been hunting for 3 days were charging straight into their camp. The fighting was chaos, even by our standards. I kicked a Cthor soldier into a pool of electrified runoff, watched his armor seize before he sank. Vale blew the side off a munitions shed, turning the blast into an improvised smokescreen. Han, still limping from shrapnel in her thigh, took down a warform twice her size by jamming a scavenged power cell into its chestplate and letting it overload. Then came the objective, their command tent. It was less a tent and more a portable command hub, shielded and armored, with a dozen guards. We didn't stop to plan. We broke through like a wave hitting glass, and when the shards cleared, I was standing over their central console, the enemy commander sprawled unconscious at my feet. I tore the encrypted battle network core free from its housing, tucked it under my arm, and signaled the retreat. We'd lost half the wolves in that push. Every one of them knew what it would cost before we moved. And every one of them came anyway. Because that's what the wolves did. We finished what we started. The battle ended without ceremony. No triumphant march, no ringing of victory chimes. The plasma storm burned itself out by dawn, leaving the air heavy with the stench of scorched metal and vaporized flesh. The Cthor were gone, scattered into the wastelands, their base gutted and their chain of command shattered. We had won, or at least survived, but standing there among the wreckage, it didn't feel like either. We limped back to what was left of the refinery. Of the iron wolves who had dropped with me 3 days earlier, barely a third were still alive, and none of us were whole. Armor was shredded. Weapons held together with field tape and stubbornness. Faces gray with exhaustion and streaked with soot, eyes hollow from too many hours staring down death without blinking. Han collapsed the moment we crossed the threshold into our makeshift stronghold. Vale's left arm hung useless at his side, the armor there fused into an ugly lump from a direct hit. I felt every step in my bones, like the ground itself was trying to drag me under. But I didn't stop moving, not yet. There was still work to do. The battle network core we'd ripped from the Cthor command hub sat on the table in front of me, its surfaces still warm from the heat of their systems. It was the kind of intelligence that could change the course of the war, deployment schedules, supply chains, coded orders from their high command. I should have been proud. Instead, I just felt empty. When the Council finally decided to acknowledge us, they didn't send medics. They sent transports. Clean, sterile ships that hovered above the wreckage like carrion birds, waiting for permission to swoop in. They took the core. They took the wounded. They didn't take the dead, those we buried ourselves in the wasteland, marking the graves with whatever scraps of metal or stone we could find. I expected a debriefing, maybe even commendations. What we got was reassignment. Quiet, sudden, and absolute. One by one, the wolves were scattered, Vale to a training command on a distant agricultural world, Han to a supply depot in a system no one had heard of. Those who pushed back found themselves discharged or reassigned again until they stopped asking questions. Then my orders came. Not back to the front, not even to another unit. They scrubbed my record from active rosters and listed me as on extended leave. No explanation, no appeal. Just gone. It took me a long time to understand. The Council didn't want heroes. Heroes inspired people. Heroes reminded the galaxy that humans weren't just another species to be slotted neatly into their political games. They wanted control. And soldiers like me, like the wolves, were a reminder that some things couldn't be controlled. Their axis, 4 never happened in the official record. The Iron Wolves were never there. But I remember. I remember every shot fired, every friend buried, every step through that storm. And I remember the look on the Council's faces when they realized what we were capable of. That, they couldn't erase. Now I understood why they'd called this hearing. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't even about strategy. It was about control, the same control they'd tried to assert after their Axis 4 by scattering the wolves and erasing the battle from history. The chamber wasn't a courtroom, it was a dissection table, and the man in the footage was the specimen. I stood near the back, letting the alien delegates and their aides murmur over the looping hollow. My image, frozen in a frame of chaos, armor scorched, carrying 2 wounded under my arms, hovered above the dais like an insect pinned under glass. They'd stripped away the context, the desperation, the screams, until all that remained was a neat little sequence of improbable actions they could poke at with theories. Counselor Vra, a lean, insectoid elder with a voice that hissed like sand over stone, leaned forward. This human's behavior defied tactical logic, physical endurance limits, and survival instinct. Such recklessness is unknown among rational species. Her words floated in the stale, recycled air, and I could feel the shift in the room. They weren't just curious, they were concerned. To them, I wasn't a soldier. I was a weapon they hadn't built and didn't understand. A Talvathi general, scaled, with eyes like black mirrors, tilted his head. We must study such individuals. Is this anomaly common among their kind, or is it singular? The question made me want to laugh, but I kept my face neutral. They didn't know. They didn't want to know the truth, that the wolves weren't special, not in the way they thought. That if you put almost any human in the same position, they'd have made the same choices. It wasn't about training. It was about something far older and harder to quantify. They cycled through more footage, different angles, enhanced to track my movements. A pause here to analyze my heart rate. A slow-motion replay of me shielding Han from a blast that tore through my armor. They spoke about me like I wasn't there, as though I were already a ghost. And maybe I was. An aide whispered something to Vra, and the counselor's mandibles twitched. This soldier's identity remains unverified. We have no surviving records beyond this engagement. It was deliberate. My erasure had worked, too well, perhaps. They'd scoured the archives for a name, a unit designation, even a fragment of service record, and found nothing. The wolves had been ghosts for years, and now their anomaly was just another unsolved equation. I could have stepped forward then, ended the speculation. I could have told them who I was and watched their perfect composure crack. But not yet. For now, I let them wonder. Let them whisper about the man who had no record, no history, yet had shaped the outcome of a battle they pretended never happened. When my moment came, I'd make sure they understood exactly what kind of human they'd been dissecting in their minds, and why they should be afraid of all the others. They called for a recess, the delegates dispersing into clusters of hushed conversation, their bodyguards forming protective bubbles around them. The hollow of the battle still hung in the air, frozen on that moment where I was dragging Vale and Han through the plasma rain, my face half hidden behind a cracked visor. Most of them didn't even glance at it as they left the chamber. But a few kept looking. That's when I knew the seed had been planted. I stayed in the shadows of the observation tier, leaning on the rail, letting the murmur of alien voices fade until the chamber was almost empty. Only the cleaning drones hummed quietly, sweeping away the day's detritus. My reflection in the glass before me was a stranger. Shorter hair now, no insignia, the kind of nondescript clothes you could lose in a crowd. I could have been anyone. And that was my advantage. The council thought they'd erased me. The wolves were scattered, names scrubbed from the record, histories rewritten. To them, that meant we were gone. But humans are good at living in the cracks. The wolves had been building something in the dark ever since. Networks, safehouses, caches of equipment and intel that the council couldn't track because it didn't officially exist. I slipped out a side entrance, blending with the maintenance crews in the wide, echoing corridors of the station. My boots knew the way without thinking, muscle memory guiding me to a forgotten storage bay deep in the underlevels. The door opened to a space lit only by a single flickering strip light, casting long shadows over stacked crates and a battered comms array. Vale's voice crackled through before I even keyed the mic. We saw the feed. "You were in the room." "Yeah," I said, setting the encrypted core we'd been nursing since their Axis 4 onto the table. "They still don't know it was me." Han's voice joined in, rough but steady. "Good. Let them keep guessing. Makes them nervous." There was a beat of silence, the kind that carries more meaning than words. We all remembered the storm. The losses. The moment we realized the Council would rather bury us than acknowledge what we'd done. That memory was a kind of gravity, pulling us together no matter how far they tried to scatter us. "They're scared," I said finally. "Not of me. Of us. They don't understand what we are, and that's exactly how it needs to stay." Vale laughed, low and humorless. "So what's the play?" I looked at the core, at the blinking green light that said it was still alive. Inside it was more than just battle data, supply routes, fleet deployments, weaknesses the Council would never admit existed. "We remind them," I said, "that humans don't vanish just because someone decides we should." In the dark, the wolves stirred again. Not officially. Not on any record. But in the places the Council never looked, we were already moving. And next time, they'd know exactly who we were. And why they'd been right to be afraid.